Again, if we look at another problem between people of the same sexes, homosexuality. Male homosexuality is more common than amongst females. Again, here we find that homosexuality causes a problem of guilt and anxiety, particularly because the people practicing homosexuality know it's not accepted in the community. And in Australia, in particular, homosexuality is not tolerated. And I think we have to remember that these people don't choose to be homosexuals. They, in fact, are made this way.
Yes, I do. Well, I've been watching you walk by, and I haven't said a word. What you want? Get what you want. What you want? Get what you want. Well, I'm ready to get you right now, and I'm gonna make you my man. What you want? Get what you want. Yes, I am. What you want? Get what you want. Because I take just what I want. Baby, all I want is you. I want you. Oh, yes, I do.
I am a lesbian. I first had these feelings about the age of 11, just when I started to mature. The first physical contact was in a girl's home. I wasn't aware of this being unnatural because it seemed so very natural to me. As a matter of fact, I was called a homosexual and I cried. Quite a number of girls are practising lesbians. For example, in Sydney, there's quite a few clubs where you can go to, you can meet these girls. There'd be at least, say, 3 different dances in the townships on the weekends. You'd find at least 600, 700 girls there. From the time I was 18 or 19, I have at different intervals dressed as a man, lived as a man, worked as a man. I've had different jobs, going from a barman to a tow truck driver to a dog catcher. On quite a few occasions my father used to take me down to the local hotel where he used to drink with all his mates, and he always used to refer to me as his son because he hasn't got any sons and he's always wanted a son, and he always referred to me as his son, my son this and my son that. And after he gets a few drinks in and he doesn't remember quite so well, he refers to me as his daughter, and it really mixes people up. But
homosexuality is found in both men and women. The exact frequency of this disorder is not known. Estimates vary, but in general one would think there would be somewhere about 3 to 6 out of every 100 men and about 1 to 3 out of every 100 women have some degree or other of homosexual problem. The weight of modern research would indicate that the cause of homosexuality, in large part at least, lies within the early environmental experiences, including the experiences within the family.
Well, before I was born, my mother was carrying me. She was told by a doctor that she was definitely going to have a boy. Seeing she already had 2 girls, and my father was away at war, she was really thrilled with the idea of having a boy. She had the whole nursery all planned out in blue. She had a name picked out for me, and that was all there was to it. I was going to be a boy. Well, when I turned out to be a girl, it was quite an upset for Mum. She had a slight nervous breakdown, and with that she refused to have anything to do with me. She said as far as she was concerned I wasn't hers, and she refused to take me home from hospital. I was fostered out with some very nice people that have fostered me, looked after me right through my life and done everything that they could possibly do for me.
I first became aware of homosexuality when a cousin who is now an archbishop somewhere in the British Commonwealth tried to take advantage of me when I was 4. I have had a number of jobs, including one on the wharves. Only in a friendly manner have I ever been sent up on the wharves. If a stranger attempts to do so, he finishes in the drink very smartly. Either I do it or somebody else feeds me to it. I still have all these friends. When I say friend, I mean that in its literal sense. I'm friends with them and their wives, and I'm accepted everywhere from the government house to the brothels and beer houses in Fitzroy.
It should be borne in mind that the homosexuals of whom most people are aware are only the tip of the iceberg and are not in any way really representative of the vast majority of homosexuals. It should also be borne in mind that homosexuals who are seen by fellow doctors and psychiatrists or other professional groups within the community are also not generally representative, and they are, in one respect or another, what one might call failed homosexuals.
Ted, I understand that you're a married man and yet you are a homosexual, is that correct?
That is correct.
How old were you when you became aware of your homosexual interests?
All my conscious life. I think I was first aware of it when I was about 15.
Ted, do I take it that you find very little difference between the two feelings, homosexual or heterosexual?
Yes. To me, there's little, if any, difference at all. I find that the human being that you love is the same. The sex just doesn't enter into it.
You are a married man and you have children, I suppose, to general appearances. You are a normal husband and a normal father, and yet despite the anxieties about the law which you mentioned, you have carried on being a homosexual. You mentioned the troubles due to this. Do you feel that changing the law would in any way help, as far as you're concerned?
Oh, very definitely. If the law were changed, the only thing we'd then have to cope with would be the social problem that we suffer. Changing the law would remove quite a considerable amount of anxiety on our part. We do need to be relieved of the mental pressures that being homosexual causes.
Well, could we say that, in fact, you have loved some men, or a man, as deeply as you have ever loved any woman?
Yes, there was one person that I loved, possibly more intensely than any woman that I've ever loved. I was quite driven to distraction over this person, and perhaps I think this feeling was the most intense of all my life.
The physical and emotional side of homosexuality to the homosexual is extremely important. Let me say without fear of contradiction by any psychiatrist that the physical aspect of it is immensely satisfactory to both parties. And quite frequently, marriage, if I may use the term rather loosely, having taken place, endures until death do they part. But this is not the normal course of events. Usually an affair lasts from 3 to 9 months. Then, for various reasons, the parties split up and go their own way. And he is looking for something else and she is looking for something else, and they frequently become quite desperate. They start to frequent toilets, hotels that have a reputation for harbouring homosexuals, and various clubs and nightclubs. Herein lies tragedy for a good many of them, as they are frequently picked up by unscrupulous semi-crims and exploited, frequently robbed and frequently bashed. Homosexuality is something that cannot be helped, and I defy any psychiatrist to say that it can. I have known a good number of psychiatrists who themselves were homosexuals, and it comes back to the old biblical saying there, physician, heal thyself. If you can't heal yourself, how then do you expect to heal one of your patients? You know that this cannot be done because the patient does not want to be healed.
So far as treatment is concerned, it is very difficult to help a person who does not wish for or cannot wish for change towards more heterosexuality. However, with modern means of treatment, it is possible in a proportion of cases to help the person to develop more heterosexual interest in others. One has to settle for helping them to accept themselves and their homosexuality.
It is not an easy life. It is a terribly hard and a terribly sad life. Not only sad for the persons concerned, but for their parents and relatives who have to put up with the snides and slings and arrows of this particular outrageous fortune.
Brother. I reckon they're rats. They will be kicked to death.
Well, I haven't never had much to do with it, Michelle.
The queers? Keep your back to the wall. Well, our attitude towards queers is, if I was talking to a queer, it might be pretty queer, my attitude towards it, you know? I don't like them at all.
Well, queers, I think, should be licensed.
When men congregate together in a hotel or in a club or socially in any way, I think it's a very unfair accusation to say that this is a manifestation of latent homosexuality.
Oh, I reckon if you haven't got a mate, you've got no one to look forward to. Like you come down the pub, you have a drink with your mate. And there's a lot of blokes in here that I'll bag up that'll be real good mates for you if you need them. Coming here without a quid, and I'll tell you what, you'll always get a beer.
I can rely on mateship in Australia. I've been all around Victoria, logging. I've been around New South Wales, Queensland, logging. I know all people, and I know all people in Melbourne.
Well, from my point of view, from the mates I've got, I like it. I like it a lot. We have our blues, our tips, kid to kid. See what I mean? We have our little blues and our little tips. Anyway, they're a good pack of blokes. And we stick by each other, and that's all there is to it.
I think that a mate is, as long as you've got your own mate, a mate is more valuable than another quid to throw away.
Of course, the funny part about it is I've met many blokes in pubs who've got very odd views on things regarding homosexuality. One of them is that there's a widespread belief these days that if a man wears a pair of shorts, he has to wear short socks, because if he wears long socks, he's regarded as being camp or something. And I know a chap who wouldn't dream of carrying an umbrella. I know plenty of blokes who would never dream of carrying an umbrella, and I've seen them standing like drowned rats in the pouring rain and see a chap walk past with a quite comfortable and dry under an umbrella and say, look at that bloody poofed bastard walking past there.
I think perhaps it's interesting to look at the legislation relating to this particular criminal offence, because it's the one piece of legislation which is not phrased in the normal dry language of the law. Crimes such as incest and sex offences against young children are all defined in this dry language, whereas with homosexual offences you find phrases such as the abominable crime of buggery and an act of gross indecency.
I think contrary to public opinion, the incidence of homosexuality in our prisons is not really productive of an increase in sexual deviation, homosexual behaviour in particular. Although obviously the incidence of homosexuality and other forms of deviant sexual behaviour will depend to some extent on the type of prison one has.
Look, any man that's going to be put away for 10 or 15 years and is suddenly in a cell next to a pretty boy who's open to suggestions. Look, criminal though he might be, he's only human. Of course he's going to fall, and fall hard.
Now, as a general proposition, I think one can say that a male in a homosexual relationship in the prison is only really concerned with what you can call a biological and mechanical satisfaction. There is very little emotional content in this. One can perhaps put it best if you simply say this. If A and B, who are two males, are in some homosexual relationship together, and A then leaves or moves from that particular division, B will not be terribly upset. He will find C. In the case of the male, there's no loss of the loved object. There's merely the loss of a useful collaborator in a mechanical act.
This is not so, because I have known cases, and good many cases, where the love affair is endured well after one partner has got out, and the others has gone entirely into retreat until the other has got out. And then they've continued their liaison until many, many years after their release. The screws in prison are supposed to supervise this. For the most part, they couldn't care less. All they want to do is get through their day with a minimum of friction. There are still others who indulge in homosexuality. I have known them to put threats on prisoners that if they didn't come across to them, they would see that they were put before the governor on some real or imagined charge. Whether relating to homosexuality or not is not important, because you can still go to H Division anyway, and only a mongrel dog would want to go there.
I found that photo of you yesterday, the one when you're terribly butch. Just on the dressing table.
Well, I suppose we could always keep it and frame it, just for old time's sake. It's much easier if you're living with a person to be in love with them. It's pretty hard to live with someone and not be in love with them. But if it's just a girl that you see when you're out somewhere and you fancy her, well, I suppose it's the same as a man. If he sees somebody he fancies, he takes her. Lesbian relationship is very much the same as a relationship between a man and a woman, but it's much more lasting. With a man and a woman, when they eventually break up or separate, they become more or less enemies, but with two girls, they usually stay very good friends, usually for the rest of their life, and very close, as Beverly and myself are now. I mean, we used to live together as man and wife, but now we're just very good friends. I'm usually the shoulder that she comes to cry on when she needs something.
I'd be terrified of sex with a man. I wouldn't know what to do. You'll do for a start.
I understand that when Queen Victoria was approached, when the introduction of homosexual legislation came about in England, the statesmen of the day just found it impossible to explain to her what lesbians did and what lesbianism involved. And rather than go through with this embarrassing exercise of explaining it to Queen Victoria, they decided to drop that piece of the legislation.